Have you ever felt invisible like a ghost, serving the living your struggles and your humanity completely unseen? For Caroline Jenkins, a 24-year-old waitress, that feeling was her every single day. At the most exclusive charity gala of the year, surrounded by a sea of wealth and power, she wasn't just invisible, she became the target. A cruel laugh, a deliberate shove, and the icy shock of a swimming pool in front of hundreds of laughing spectators. They thought they had broken her. They thought it was a joke. But they never counted on the one man in the crowd who wasn't laughing. The man who owned everything, and whose next move would leave every single one of them utterly and completely speechless. The air at the Blackwood estate shimmered thick with the scent of night-blooming jasmine and expensive perfume. It was the kind of scent Caroline Jenkins associated with a life she only saw through a window. Tonight she was on the other side of the glass, but she was more invisible than ever. Her black uniform was stiff and practical, a stark contrast to the river of silk satin and jewels that flowed around her. This was the annual Sterling Gala, a night where the city's elite gathered to congratulate themselves on their generosity, donating fractions of their fortunes to causes they'd forget by morning. For Caroline, it was just another 8-hour shift, a very long, very grueling 8-hour shift that paid double-time money she desperately needed. Her thoughts, as they always did, drifted to her younger sister Anna. Anna, with her bright, infectious smile and lungs that didn't work quite right. Each wheezing breath was a ticking clock, and the experimental treatment her doctors recommended was a mountain of bills Caroline had to climb one grueling shift at a time. So she smiled, she balanced trays laden with champagne flutes that were worth more than her rent, and she navigated the maze of egos with practiced deference. "Excuse me?" "Miss." A voice dripped with condescension. Caroline turned to face Tiffany Vanderbilt, a local heiress whose face was plastered across society blogs. She was beautiful in a sharp, brittle way, her diamond necklace catching the light and refracting it into 1,000 tiny daggers. Beside her stood her fiancé, Geoffrey Croft, whose handsome face was set in a mask of polite boredom. "My champagne is warm," Tiffany said, not looking at Caroline, but at Geoffrey, as if Caroline were a piece of furniture that had malfunctioned. "Get me a fresh one, from an unopened bottle, and make sure it's chilled properly this time." "Of course, Miss Vanderbilt." Right away, Caroline said, her professional smile firmly in place. It was a mask she had perfected. Inside, she was counting. That was the 3rd time Tiffany had sent a drink back for a fabricated reason. It was a power play, a small act of cruelty to remind everyone of her place in the food chain. As Caroline turned to leave, she caught Geoffrey's eye for a fraction of a second. There was a flicker of something there. Embarrassment, pity. It vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the same aristocratic indifference he wore like a well-tailored suit. He was a passenger in Tiffany's world, content to enjoy the ride and ignore the people she ran over. Caroline moved through the throng, her feet already aching in the cheap but mandatory uniform shoes. She ignored the snippets of conversation stock portfolios summering in the Hamptons complaints about the quality of the help these days. To them, she wasn't a person. She was a function, a pair of hands. She was the one who refilled their glasses, cleared their plates, and absorbed their casual disdain without a word. She secured a new, perfectly chilled glass of champagne and began the long walk back across the sprawling marble terrace. The centerpiece of the estate was a magnificent infinity pool, its surface like a sheet of dark glass, reflecting the starry sky and the glittering fairy lights strung in the ancient oak trees. The party naturally gravitated towards it, the sound of laughter and chatter echoing over the water. As she approached Tiffany's group, she saw them laughing at a joke one of their friends had made. Tiffany's laugh was high and sharp, a sound designed to draw attention. As Caroline offered the tray to her, Tiffany's eyes cold, and calculating met hers. And in that moment, Caroline knew this wasn't just about a warm drink anymore. Geoffrey, perhaps feeling a pang of guilt, reached for the glass himself. "Thank you," he murmured, his fingers brushing against Caroline's. It was a small, almost insignificant gesture, but in Tiffany Vanderbilt's world it was a transgression. Her fiancé had shown a moment of human decency to the help. He had looked at the waitress as a person. Tiffany's smile tightened, the humour vanishing from her eyes, replaced by a venomous spark. "Geoffrey, darling, be careful," she cooed, her voice sickly sweet. "You don't know where those hands have been." The comment hung in the air, heavy and insulting. Caroline's cheeks flushed with heat, a deep, burning humiliation. She kept her gaze fixed on the tray, her knuckles white as she gripped its edge. "Just get through the shift. Just get home to Anna." The mantra played over and over in her head. She began to turn to retreat into the anonymity of the crowd. But Tiffany wasn't finished. "Oh, Waitress Tiffany," called out her voice sharp. Caroline paused, her back still to the group. "You almost forgot something." Caroline turned back slowly, her heart pounding, a nervous rhythm against her ribs. Tiffany was holding out her empty glass from before, a smirk playing on her lips. "Take this." As Caroline reached for the glass, Tiffany took a small, deliberate step forward. It looked like a stumble, a clumsy misstep in her impossibly high heels. Her arm shot out supposedly to catch her balance, but it didn't find a wall or a friend's shoulder. Her perfectly manicured hand, adorned with a gaudy diamond ring, slammed into Caroline's side. It wasn't a gentle nudge. It was a firm, calculated shove. The world tilted. For a terrifying second, Caroline was suspended in disbelief, the tray clattering to the marble champagne glasses, shattering in a crystalline explosion. Then gravity took hold. Her feet left the solid ground, and she was falling backward, a strangled gasp escaping her lips. The shock was twofold. First, the betrayal of the act itself, the sheer, unprovoked malice. Second, the physical jolt of the water. It was icy cold, a brutal slap to her senses that stole the air from her lungs. Her heavy uniform instantly became a leaden weight, pulling her down into the chlorinated depths. She surfaced, sputtering, and disoriented, her hair plastered to her face. The glittering lights of the party blurred into a confusing kaleidoscope. Water filled her ears, muffling the world. But then, as her senses cleared, one sound broke through, sharp and cruel and undeniable. Laughter. It started with Tiffany's triumphant, piercing shriek. Then her friends joined in a chorus of derision. Soon it spread like a virus through the crowd. Dozens of men in tuxedos, women in designer gowns were pointing, laughing at the drenched, pathetic sight of the waitress in the pool. They weren't laughing with her. They were laughing at her humiliation, at her powerlessness. Caroline's arms thrashed in the water as she fought to stay afloat, the weight of her waterlogged shoes trying to pull her under. But the physical struggle was nothing compared to the emotional one. Every peal of laughter was a physical blow, stripping away her dignity, her composure, her carefully constructed mask of professionalism. They saw her now, not as a person, but as the punchline to a cruel joke. She looked for a friendly face, a hand to help a single shred of compassion in the sea of smiling, jeering faces. She saw Geoffrey Croft standing beside Tiffany. He wasn't laughing, but he wasn't helping either. He just stood there, his face pale, trapped by his own cowardice, as his fiancée preened, basking in the spotlight of her cruelty. In that moment, submerged in cold water and drowning in ridicule, Caroline felt a despair so profound it threatened to swallow her whole. She had never felt so alone. The laughter swelled, reaching a crescendo of collective mockery. To the guests, this was the unexpected entertainment of the evening, a brief, hilarious interlude in their otherwise predictable lives. They saw a clumsy waitress, a funny accident. They didn't see a young woman's spirit being crushed under the weight of their amusement. Caroline finally managed to paddle to the side of the pool, her fingers gripping the slick tile edge. Her body trembled uncontrollably from the cold and the shock. She tried to haul herself out, but her sodden uniform clung to her heavy and uncooperative. The effort was exhausting, and the continued laughter sapped what little strength she had left. And then something shifted. It wasn't sudden. It was a slow, creeping change in the atmosphere. A few of the laughs faltered. A nervous murmur began to ripple through the outer edges of the crowd. The people closest to the source of the change fell silent first, their smiles freezing and sliding from their faces. The silence spread inward, like a cold front snuffing out the cruel humor, until the only sound left was Tiffany's self-satisfied giggle, which now sounded jarring and ugly in the sudden quiet. She too finally noticed the shift and trailed off a confused look on her face. Into this deafening silence, a voice spoke. It wasn't loud, but it carried an authority that cut through the night air with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. "Are you all enjoying the show?" The question was calm, almost conversational, yet it was laced with a steel so cold it made the pool water feel warm. Every head turned towards the source. Standing near the grand French doors that led out to the terrace was a man. He was older, perhaps in his late 50s, with salt and pepper hair, and a face that looked as if it had been carved from granite. He was dressed in a simple, impeccably tailored dark suit, without the flashy accessories many of the other men sported. He hadn't been part of the boisterous crowd. He had been an observer standing in the shadows. Until now. He began to walk towards the pool. He didn't hurry. Every step was deliberate, measured, and with each one, the collective tension of the crowd grew thicker. People unconsciously parted ways for him, a silent acknowledgement of a power they didn't understand, but instinctively respected. This was Alistair Blackwood, the reclusive billionaire, the host of the party, the man whose name was on the deed to every inch of the estate they stood on. Most of the guests had never even seen him. He was famously private, preferring to let his foundations and his businesses speak for him. His presence alone was a shock. His demeanor was a thunderclap. He walked directly to the edge of the pool, where Caroline was still clinging her teeth, chattering. He ignored the hundreds of gaping onlookers. He ignored Tiffany Vanderbilt, who suddenly looked very small and very nervous. His focus was entirely on the young woman in the water. He knelt down on the expensive marble, uncaring of the creases it would put in his trousers. His eyes, a piercing shade of grey, were not filled with pity, but with a profound, respectful empathy. "Miss," he said, his voice now gentle but firm. "Give me your hand." Caroline stared at him, bewildered. His hand was outstretched, a strong, steady hand that bore the calluses of a life that had known work before it had known wealth. Hesitantly, she placed her trembling, water-wrinkled hand in his. With an ease that belied his age, he pulled her from the water. She stumbled onto the marble, dripping and shivering, a pathetic figure under the glare of the party lights. Without a word, Alistair Blackwood shrugged off his own suit jacket, a bespoke piece worth more than Caroline's car, and wrapped it around her shoulders. It was warm from his body, and the simple act of kindness was so unexpected, so powerful, that tears welled in Caroline's eyes, mixing with the pool water on her cheeks. He helped her to her feet. Then, and only then, did he turn to face the silent, stunned crowd. His gaze swept over them, and for the first time, many of them felt the chilling sensation of being judged by their superior. Finally, his eyes landed on Tiffany Vanderbilt. The cold fury was back, focused now into a laser point. "You," he said, the single word hanging in the air like a death sentence. "You find this amusing? Tiffany Vanderbilt had built her entire identity on a foundation of wealth privilege and the fear she inspired in others. She had never been truly challenged, never been held accountable. Faced now with the glacial wrath of Alistair Blackwood, that foundation began to crumble into dust. She tried to laugh it off, a high-pitched, nervous sound that died in her throat. "Mr. Blackwood. It was just an accident. The girl is clumsy. It was a silly little mishap. An accident." Mr. Blackwood repeated his voice, dangerously soft. He took a step towards her. Geoffrey beside her looked like he wanted the marble terrace to open up and swallow him whole. "I have been standing by those doors for the last 10 minutes. I have a rather clear vantage point. What I saw was not an accident. What I saw was an assault." The word assault shot through the crowd, turning nervous discomfort into palpable shock. This was no longer a social faux pas. It was something far more serious. "That's ridiculous," Tiffany stammered, her face paling beneath its expensive makeup. "She's just a waitress." The moment the words left her mouth, she knew she had made a catastrophic error. Mr. Blackwood's expression hardened. "She is a young woman who was here doing her job, a job that I imagine is considerably more honest than whatever it is you do." He paused, letting the insult land with devastating weight. He then raised his voice slightly, addressing the entire gathering. "Welcome everyone to my home. I host this gala every year to support the Sterling Foundation, a foundation dedicated to helping underprivileged youth children who have been kicked down, overlooked, and ostracized. We raise money here tonight to give them a chance to show them that their worth is not determined by their circumstances." His gaze swept across the silent faces, each one a portrait of dawning horror. And tonight he continued, his voice ringing with righteous anger. "You have all been entertained by the sight of a young working woman being publicly humiliated for your amusement. You stood by and you laughed. What a wonderful tribute to the spirit of charity. The shame was now a physical presence on the terrace, thick and suffocating. People shuffled their feet, avoided eye contact. The laughter they had so freely given now felt like a stain on their character. Mr. Blackwood's attention returned to Tiffany, who was visibly trembling. "Miss Vanderbilt, your father's company, Vanderbilt Holdings, is a corporate sponsor of this event. I believe they have a significant construction contract with my corporation for the new downtown tower." Tiffany's eyes widened in panic. "Mr. Blackwood, please." "Effective immediately. That contract is terminated." He stated his tone, leaving no room for negotiation. "Furthermore, Vanderbilt Holdings, and anyone associated with its executive board, is hereby banned from any and all future Blackwood events. I will not have my philanthropic endeavors tainted by the presence of people who embody the very cruelty we seek to fight." A collective gasp went through the crowd. This wasn't just a social slap on the wrist. This was a multi-million-dollar execution delivered in public. He wasn't finished. He turned his steely gaze to Geoffrey Croft. "And you, Mr. Croft, you stood there and watched. Your silence makes you just as complicit as her actions. Your family's law firm has been on retainer with Blackwood Industries for 3 generations. I suggest your father starts looking for new clients first thing Monday morning." Geoffrey looked as if he'd been physically struck. This was a legacy, a dynasty undone in a single sentence, because he had been too weak to act. Alistair Blackwood had in less than 5 minutes dismantled 2 of the city's most prominent families with nothing but words. He turned his back on them, a final dismissive gesture, and focused once more on Caroline, who stood wrapped in his jacket, watching the entire scene unfold in a state of shock. "Come, my dear," he said gently, his voice devoid of the ice it held moments before. He placed a steadying hand on her back. "Let's get you somewhere warm. We have things to discuss." He began to lead her away from the pool, away from the shattered ruins of Tiffany Vanderbilt's social life, and towards the main house. The crowd parted for them like the Red Sea. their faces a mixture of awe, fear, and deep deserved shame. They were all speechless. The joke was over, and the punchline they were horrified to realize had been them all along. Mr. Blackwood led Caroline through a private entrance into the main house, leaving the toxic atmosphere of the party behind. The interior of the estate was not as ostentatiously modern as the terrace. It was filled with rich mahogany shelves of leather-bound books and the quiet dignity of old money. He guided her to a library where a fire was crackling in a large stone hearth. "Please sit," he said, gesturing to a plush leather armchair near the fire. "Mrs. Gable, my housekeeper, will be here with a change of clothes and some hot tea." Caroline sank into the chair, the warmth from the fire beginning to seep into her chilled bones. She clutched the heavy suit jacket around her, a strange combination of a priceless garment and the scent of rain and old paper. She was in a daze. The humiliation by the pool, the sudden silence, the public takedown of two powerful families, it all felt like a bizarre, vivid dream. "Mr. Blackwood, I don't know what to say," she stammered, her voice still shaky. "Thank you. You didn't have to do that." He sat in the opposite chair, his expression softening as he looked at her. "What I did to Miss Vanderbilt and Mr. Croft was a matter of business and principle. What I did for you was a matter of basic human decency. No thanks are necessary." An older woman with a kind face, presumably Mrs. Gable, entered quietly with a tray. On it was a steaming mug of tea, a thick towel, and a simple, comfortable-looking sweatsuit. She gave Caroline a warm, sympathetic smile before retreating discreetly. "Please," Mr. Blackwood urged, "get comfortable." Caroline went into an adjoining powder room and changed out of her drenched, demeaning uniform. The warm, dry clothes felt like a gift from heaven. When she returned, she found Mr. Blackwood looking at something he'd picked up from the floor where his jacket had been. It was her small, worn-out notepad that had fallen from her pocket, now warped from the water. It had flipped open to a page filled with intricate, detailed sketches. They were designs, not for buildings or machines, but for kinetic art installations, beautiful, delicate sculptures designed to move with the wind. It was her secret passion, the dream she worked on in stolen moments. Between shifts, the one thing that was truly hers. Her face burned with a new kind of embarrassment. "Oh, that's nothing. Just silly doodles." Mr. Blackwood looked up from the pad, and there was a new light in his eyes, one of genuine interest. "These are not silly doodles." "Miss Jenkins," he said, his voice holding a note of reverence. "These are brilliant. The understanding of balance, of airflow, of aesthetic form. This is the work of an artist. Or an engineer. My father was an engineer," Caroline said, quietly, surprised at her own admission. "He taught me about physics. I like to draw." He looked at her, truly looked at her, in a way no one at the party had. He wasn't seeing a waitress. He was seeing a person with a history, a passion, a hidden talent. "Caroline," he said, using her first name for the first time, "I'm going to ask you a personal question, and you are under no obligation to answer. Why are you working as a waitress when you clearly have a gift like this?" The simple, direct question broke through her final wall of composure. The stress of the night, the constant worry for her sister, the sudden, overwhelming kindness from this stranger, it all came pouring out. She told him about Anna, about her cystic fibrosis, about the mountain of medical bills, and the specialized treatment that was her only real hope. She spoke of putting her dreams of attending design school on an indefinite hold of the crushing weight of responsibility she carried every single day. Alistair Blackwood listened patiently, his gaze never wavering. He didn't interrupt. He didn't offer platitudes or pity. He just listened. When she finished, the room was quiet, save for the crackling of the fire. "Courage is not the absence of fear," he said softly, as if quoting from one of the many books that surrounded them. It is the assessment that something else is more important than fear. You, Carolyn, are one of the most courageous people I have ever met. He stood up and walked to a large oak desk. He wrote something on a piece of paper. "I am not going to offer you charity," he said, turning back to her. "Charity is a bandage, not a cure. And a talent like yours doesn't need a bandage. It needs an opportunity." He handed her the paper. It was a name and a phone number. "That is Dr. Anne Levine at the Children's National Hospital. She is the leading researcher in pediatric respiratory illnesses in the country. Her entire research wing is funded by the Blackwood Foundation. I will make a call. Anna will have an appointment by the end of the week. All of her medical expenses will be covered. No bills, no paperwork for you to worry about. Consider it done." Caroline stared at the paper, her vision blurring with tears. This was more than she could have ever dreamed of. It was a miracle. "But that's not my offer," he continued. He gestured to her sketchbook. "This is my offer. Blackwood Industries has an architectural design division. It's one of the best in the world. They have a paid fellowship program for promising young designers. It's highly competitive. But I believe the artist who drew these sketches would be a formidable candidate." He handed her a business card. "My executive assistant's information is on that card. Call her on Monday. She'll arrange for you to meet with the head of the department. You'll have to portfolio review like everyone else. I can open the door for you, Carolyn. But your talent will have to be what carries you through it." Caroline looked from the doctor's name to the business card, her mind reeling. He was giving her everything. Not a handout, but a chance. A chance for Anna to be healthy. A chance for her to build a life, not just survive it. Why, she finally whispered the word thick with emotion. "Why are you doing all of this for me?" Alistair Blackwood looked towards the fire, a sad, distant look in his eyes. "Many years ago, my wife was a very gifted artist. She was working 2 jobs to put me through business school. One night, she was treated poorly, much like you were. Humiliated. I was too young, too poor, and too powerless to do anything about it. It's a failure I have lived with every single day since she passed." He turned his gaze back to Caroline, his eyes clear and resolute. "I cannot change my past, Caroline, but I'll be damned if I'm going to stand by and watch it happen to someone else. You remind me of her, not in looks, but in spirit. The world needs spirits like yours to succeed. Now let me arrange a car to take you home. You have a new life to prepare for. News travels fast in the circles of the elite, and news of a public implosion travels at the speed of light." By the next morning, the story of the Sterling Gala was the only thing anyone was talking about. It wasn't the story of a clumsy waitress. It was the story of Tiffany Vanderbilt's and Geoffrey Croft's spectacular fall from grace. The termination of the Blackwood Vanderbilt contract sent shockwaves through the city's financial district. It was a deal worth hundreds of millions, and its sudden cancellation caused Vanderbilt Holdings' stock to plummet. The official reason cited by Blackwood Industries was a fundamental misalignment of corporate and ethical values. Everyone knew what that meant. Mr. Vanderbilt, a titan of industry known for his ruthless nature, was reportedly apoplectic. His daughter's arrogance had cost him a fortune, and more importantly, had made him look weak. Tiffany found herself in an unprecedented position. She was a pariah. Invitations to other events were rescinded. Friends suddenly stopped answering her calls. The society blogs that once fawned over her every outfit were now feasting on the details of her downfall, painting her as a cruel, entitled villain. She had built her kingdom on the illusion of power, and with one word from Alistair Blackwood, that illusion had been shattered, revealing the pathetic, insecure person underneath. For Geoffrey Croft, the consequences were quieter, but no less devastating. His father, a proud man who saw the Blackwood account as the crown jewel of his family's legacy, had disowned him in all but name. The engagement to Tiffany was broken within 24 hours, a sterile announcement made via their lawyers. Geoffrey was left adrift, stripped of his fiancée, his professional future, and his family's respect. Alone in his now empty apartment, Geoffrey was forced to confront his own reflection for the first time. He had always known Tiffany was cruel. He had witnessed 1,000 tiny cuts she'd inflicted on service staff, on friends, on anyone she deemed beneath her. He had tolerated it, excused it, and enabled it all for the comfort and status their relationship afforded him. His silence by the pool wasn't just weakness, it was a profound moral failure. The face in the mirror was that of a coward. Driven by a desperate, unfamiliar pang of conscience, he found the catering company Caroline had worked for. He called and left a message, then another. Finally, a week later, he managed to get her personal number from a sympathetic manager. He called his heart hammering. She answered, her voice wary. "Caroline, it's Geoffrey Croft." There was a long silence on the other end. I know you have no reason to talk to me," he stammered the words, feeling hollow even to him. "But I had to call. I wanted to say, I am so sorry. For what happened. For what I did. For what I didn't do. There is no excuse for it. It was monstrous, and I was a part of it." Caroline listened, her silence unnerving. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm and steady, devoid of the fear or deference he remembered. It was the voice of someone who had found her footing on solid ground. "I appreciate the call, Geoffrey," she said, and he felt a brief, unearned flicker of hope. "It must have taken something for you to make it." "It did," he said, relieved. "I just hope you can forgive." "No." She cut him off, not unkindly, but with absolute finality. "I don't forgive you. An apology is for the person giving it, Mr. Croft. It's to make you feel better. But it doesn't erase what happened. You didn't see me as a person until it cost you something. So while I acknowledge your apology, I don't accept it. My energy is focused on my future now. I suggest you focus on yours." With that, she hung up. The click of the line was the sound of a door closing one he knew would never open again. Her refusal was not an act of vengeance. It was an act of self-worth. She was not a chapter in his redemption story. She was the hero of her own. He was just a footnote in hers, a cautionary tale of what happens when a man sells his soul for a comfortable life. And for the first time he understood the true price he had paid. 6 months felt like a lifetime. The Caroline Jenkins who walked into the gleaming glass and steel headquarters of Blackwood Industries' design division was a different person from the woman who had served champagne in a stuffy uniform. Her portfolio review had been grueling, the department heads loyal to Mr. Blackwood, but fiercely protective of their division's reputation, had shown her no favoritism. They had grilled her on her concepts, challenged her understanding of materials, and picked apart every line in her sketches. But they had not been able to deny the raw, undeniable talent on display. They saw what Alistair Blackwood had seen, a unique vision, a blend of artistic grace and engineering pragmatism. She was offered the fellowship on the spot. Now she had her own workspace, a bright, airy cubicle with a view of the city skyline. The desk was covered not with serving trays, but with blueprints, 3D models and sketches for her first major project, a kinetic sculpture for the atrium of a new children's hospital. The very hospital where her sister Anna was now a patient. Dr. Levine's treatment had worked wonders. The constant wheezing struggle for breath that had been the soundtrack to Anna's childhood was replaced by the sound of easy laughter. She had color in her cheeks and a boundless energy Caroline hadn't seen in years. The Blackwood Foundation had handled everything, removing the crushing financial burden and allowing Caroline to focus on the two things that now defined her life, her sister's recovery, and her burgeoning career. She was no longer invisible. Her colleagues respected her ideas. Her mentors challenged her to be better. She was learning and growing every day, the part of her that had been dormant for so long, the artist, the creator, the dreamer finally awakening. One afternoon Blackwood stopped by her workspace. He didn't do this often, but when he did, it was with the quiet air of a proud mentor. He looked at the design she was working on, a mobile of dozens of silver birds, engineered to dip and soar in the natural air currents of the atrium. "It's beautiful, Carolyn," he said, his voice filled with genuine admiration. "The movement is fluid, hopeful. I want the kids to look up and see something that feels like freedom," she explained, her voice confident. On her desk, next to her computer, was a framed picture of a smiling, healthy Anna. "You know, Mr. Blackwood," said a rare smile touching his lips. "The board of the Sterling Foundation recently had a vote. They've decided to change the focus of next year's gala. Instead of a self-congratulatory party, they're going to host a showcase for emerging artists from disadvantaged backgrounds, with all proceeds funding scholarships. They're calling it the Phoenix Initiative." Caroline looked at him, understanding the unspoken meaning. The foundation was changing because he had forced it to see its own hypocrisy. Her humiliation had become the catalyst for genuine change. "That sounds perfect," she said. "I thought so," he replied. He looked from her designs to the picture of Anna, and then at Caroline herself, poised, confident, and full of limitless potential. "You didn't just get a new life that night, Caroline. You reminded an old man and a whole city of jaded people what it truly means to have character. And that is a priceless gift." He gave a small nod and walked away, leaving Caroline to her work. She looked out the window at the city, spreading before her, no longer a place of struggle, but a landscape of opportunity. The memory of the cold water, the cruel laughter, the crushing humiliation. It was all still there, a scar on her past. But it was no longer a wound. It was a reminder of how far she had come, and the proof that sometimes you have to be pushed into the depths before you can learn how to fly. Success, Caroline quickly learned, was not a peaceful harbor, but a new, more complex battlefield. The fellowship at Blackwood Industries was the opportunity of a lifetime, but it also placed a target on her back. While most of her colleagues were professional and supportive, there was one who viewed her with unconcealed disdain: Michael Thorne. Michael was a senior designer, technically brilliant and fiercely ambitious. He had clawed his way up the corporate ladder with sharp elbows and a sharper intellect. In his eyes, Caroline hadn't climbed the ladder. She'd been airlifted to the top floor by Alistair Blackwood himself. He saw her not as a talented newcomer, but as the beneficiary of a billionaire's guilt-ridden whim. He called her the boss's pet project, in hushed tones by the coffee machine, and scrutinized her work with a hypercritical eye, in meetings, always looking for a flaw to exploit. His animosity came to a head during the final design phase of the hospital atrium sculpture. The project, officially named the Phoenix Wing, was Caroline's baby. She had poured her heart into it, creating a design that was not only aesthetically beautiful, but also mechanically complex, with hundreds of feather-light titanium feathers that would ripple and shift in the gentlest air currents. The key was a central gearing mechanism of her own design, which had to be perfectly balanced. One Monday morning, Caroline came into the workshop to find her prototype malfunctioning. The fluid, graceful movement was gone, replaced by a jerky, stuttering motion. A critical gear was stripped, throwing the entire mechanism out of sync. It was a major setback, one that could delay the project for weeks and jeopardize its installation deadline. While her project manager was sympathetic, the pressure was immense. Michael was quick to comment. "Perhaps the physics of it were a bit too advanced," he said, with faux sympathy during a team meeting loud enough for everyone to hear. It's one thing to sketch a dream on paper, quite another to make it work in the real world. Caroline felt the familiar sting of humiliation, a ghostly echo of the laughter by the pool. For a moment, she felt the old insecurity creep in. Was he right? Had she overreached? But then she looked at her hands, hands that now knew the feel of metal and welding tools, not just the weight of a serving tray. She thought of Anna's easy breathing, a sound of victory she heard every day. The Caroline who would have wilted under such a comment was gone. "The physics are sound," Caroline stated calmly, meeting his gaze without flinching. "The materials failed. I'll source a stronger alloy and remill the gear myself. It will be fixed by the end of the week." Her quiet confidence surprised Michael and earned her nods of respect from other team members. She didn't complain or make excuses. She owned the problem and presented a solution. But she knew, with a sinking certainty, that this was no accident. The specific gear that had failed was deep within the mechanism. Its failure felt surgical deliberate. It felt like sabotage. Miles away from the gleaming towers of Blackwood Industries, Geoffrey Croft was learning about failure on a much more personal level. After being cast out from his family and his social stratosphere, he had spent weeks in a fog of alcohol and self-pity, but despair, he discovered, was a finite resource. When it ran out, all that was left was a stark, empty reality. He was broke. His trust fund was frozen, and his name was toxic in the legal and financial worlds he once inhabited. With no other options, he took a job that required no resume and no references, working for a high-end moving company. The irony was bitter. He now spent his days carefully packing the priceless possessions of people who lived in the world he'd been exiled from. The work was brutally physical, but it was also honest. For the first time in his life, his worth was measured not by his name or his connections, but by his ability to show up on time and do the work. He grew calluses on his hands and muscles in his back. The aristocratic softness was chiseled away, replaced by a weary strength. One sweltering afternoon, his team was assigned to move a family out of a penthouse apartment. As he was carefully wrapping a fragile sculpture, a woman walked into the room to supervise. Their eyes met, and the world seemed to freeze. It was one of Tiffany's former best friends, a woman who had been there laughing at the edge of the pool. Her eyes widened in disbelief, a cruel, mocking smile spreading across her face. "Geoffrey Croft, is that really you? My God, how the mighty have fallen." The old Geoffrey would have been incinerated by the shame. But as he stood there in his sweat-stained work shirt, he felt something else. Nothing. Her opinion no longer had any power over him. "Hello, Catherine," he said, his voice even. He gestured to the sculpture in his hands. "Do you want this packed, or just thrown into the pool?" The joke was bleak, but it was his. He was owning his past, not running from it. The woman stared speechless for once, before turning and leaving the room. In that moment, Geoffrey realized he wasn't falling anymore. He had already hit the bottom, and now he was finally starting to climb. As for Tiffany, her fall had been much less dignified. With no money of her own, and her family's reputation in tatters, she had been forced to rely on the charity of a distant, disapproving aunt. Her world of galas and gossip was replaced by a small, stuffy, suburban house. One of her former friends posted a photo online, taken surreptitiously, Tiffany Vanderbilt, arguing with a cashier at a discount department store over an expired coupon. The photo went viral. The ultimate it girl had become a public meme, a cautionary tale whispered about at the very parties she was no longer invited to. Her cruelty hadn't been a source of strength. It had been a symptom of a deep, hollow emptiness that once her privilege was stripped away was all she had left. Caroline didn't report her suspicions about the sabotage. Accusations without proof would only make her look paranoid and feed Michael Thorne's narrative that she couldn't handle the pressure. Instead, she chose a different path. She worked with the ferocity of someone with everything to prove, because she still felt like she did. She didn't just replace the damaged gear. She redesigned the entire core assembly, creating a new system that was not only stronger, but also more efficient and elegant. She turned a potential disaster into an innovative triumph. Her dedication didn't go unnoticed. Mr. Blackwood, who received daily progress reports on the project, saw the dip in performance, the note about material failure, and the subsequent spike as the new design was implemented. He summoned the head of security for the design workshop, asked for the CCTV footage from the weekend before the prototype failed, and saw exactly what he needed to see. The next day, Michael Thorne was called into a meeting with HR. He was never seen in the building again. No announcement was made. The problem was simply gone. Alistair Blackwood protected his investments, and Caroline Jenkins was now one of his most valued. The day of the unveiling was bright and clear. The atrium of the new children's hospital was filled with doctors, donors, hospital staff, and families. In the front row sat Anna, her health a radiant bloom, next to a quietly proud Alistair Blackwood. When Caroline stepped up to the podium, she felt a tremor of nerves, but it was quickly replaced by a sense of profound calm. She looked out at the crowd, not as a waitress serving them, but as a creator sharing her vision. Hope is a funny thing. She began, her voice clear and steady. Sometimes it feels fragile, like something that can be easily broken. But I believe hope isn't fragile at all. It's the strongest thing in the world. It's what gets you through the night. It's what drives a doctor to find a cure, and what gives a child the strength to face another day of treatment. She paused, her eyes finding Anna. This sculpture is called the Phoenix Wing. We all know the legend of the phoenix, a creature that rises from the ashes, reborn, and stronger than before. To me, every child in this hospital is a phoenix. Every family member who supports them is a phoenix. They face challenges most of us can't imagine, and they do it with a courage that is truly awesome to behold. This work is for them. A reminder that even in the quietest, stillest moments there is movement, there is change, and there is always, always hope for a new beginning. With a nod to the technicians, a massive white sheet was pulled away. The sculpture was breathtaking. Suspended from the high ceiling, hundreds of metallic wings hung in a magnificent cascading spiral. Caught in the atrium's gentle air currents, they began to move. It wasn't a frantic motion, but a slow, synchronous breath. The entire sculpture seemed to inhale and exhale, shifting in shimmering waves of light. It was a living, breathing piece of art, a mechanical embodiment of the very hope Caroline had spoken of. The room erupted in applause, genuine and thunderous. Standing near the back of the crowd, partially obscured by a pillar, was Geoffrey Croft. He hadn't been invited, but he'd read about the event and had felt compelled to come. He wore a simple, clean shirt and jeans, looking utterly anonymous. He watched Caroline at the podium, poised and articulate, and felt not envy, but a strange sense of peace. She wasn't the girl from the pool anymore. She had been forged into this incredible woman by the very fire that was meant to consume her. He knew he could never be a part of her life, but seeing her triumph was a final, necessary closing of his own shameful chapter. He turned and slipped away before anyone noticed him, ready to continue building his own life out of the rubble. Later, as the event wound down, Mr. Blackwood approached Caroline. "Your speech was as masterfully constructed as the sculpture itself," he said. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood." For everything she replied, her gratitude immense. "Alistair," he corrected her gently, "I believe we're past the formalities. Caroline, your fellowship is coming to an end next month. I've spoken with the board. We'd like to offer you the position of Chief Designer for special projects. You won't just be a part of the team, you'll be leading it. Caroline was stunned. It was a meteoric rise, a dream she hadn't even dared to have yet. Your talent earned you this. Caroline. Nothing else, he added, preempting any self-doubt. You've proven yourself. She accepted, her heart swelling with a joy so pure it felt like its own form of flight. As the last of the guests departed, Caroline stood with Anna in the now quiet atrium. They stood directly under the sculpture, looking up as it breathed above them. The polished wings reflected their faces, one young and full of renewed health, the other bright with the light of a future she had built, not by chance, but by character. The memory of that night at the gala of the cold and the cruelty felt like a story about someone else a lifetime ago. The splash had been the end of one life, she realized, but it had also been the violent, shocking, and ultimately beautiful beginning of this one. Caroline's story is a powerful reminder that our circumstances do not define our worth. The world is full of Tiffany's and Jeffreys who may try to diminish us to make us feel small and invisible. But it is also filled with people like Alistair Blackwood who see the value in others, and most importantly, heroes like Caroline who possess a resilience and a talent that can never be extinguished. This story isn't just about a waitress being pushed into a pool. It's about a woman being pushed toward her destiny. It shows that the greatest response to cruelty isn't revenge, but radical, undeniable success. If Caroline's journey from humiliation to triumph inspired you, please give this video a like to show your support. Share it with someone who needs a reminder of their own inner strength. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more true life stories that prove that character is the one currency that truly matters in the end. Thank you for watching.